The stars had always been silent, but on this day they screamed. 500 warships tore through the fabric of space at the edge of the solar system. They came out of hyperspace like sharks rising from deep water, their massive hulls blocking out the distant light of 1,000 suns. Each ship was a kilometer long, covered in weapons that could crack a planet in half. Together they formed a wall of metal and fire that stretched across the void like a curse made real. Admiral Varth Keth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, and watched his fleet take position. He was tall for a Cathvari with gray skin that had turned almost white from decades spent in the cold light of starships. His eyes were black pools that reflected nothing, not even the glow of the tactical displays around him. He had commanded fleets for over 100 years. He had burned worlds and silenced species. He had never lost a campaign. Today would be no different. Signal the fleet, Laura said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. It always was. Before a cleansing standard containment pattern, nothing leaves the system. His officers moved quickly, their clawed fingers dancing across holographic controls. The HFY were an old race, ancient by galactic standards. They had been traveling between stars when humanity's ancestors were still learning to make fire. They had built an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds, and they had done it through one simple principle: control everything or destroy it. Humanity had failed the first test. Now they would face the second. Admiral, one of his officers, said, "We are receiving transmissions from the human home world. They are confused." Of course they are, Vith replied. They did not expect us. They believed their little expansion into the frontier would go unnoticed. They believed the galaxy was empty and waiting for them. He allowed himself a small smile. They were wrong. The officer hesitated. Should we respond to their transmissions? Voreth considered this. The protocols were clear. A species marked for cleansing deserved no explanation, no warning, no mercy. But Vath was old, and old commanders sometimes liked to watch their prey struggle before the end. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies. Let them hear their sentence." Communications array hummed to life. Voreth straightened his uniform and clasped his hands behind his back. When he spoke, his words carried across the void to every radio, every screen, every device in the Sol system that could receive a signal. "Humans of Earth," he began, "I am Admiral Varth Keth of the Cathvari Dominion. Your species has been judged. You have expanded beyond your boundaries. You have claimed worlds that were not yours to claim. You have reached into the stars without proper submission to the established order. These crimes carry one penalty." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Extinction." On the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, his officers watched the sensors. They could see the human ship scrambling, the emergency communications flooding every channel, the desperate attempts to coordinate response. It was almost sad, Var thought, like watching insects try to flee a fire. "You have 48 hours, Vath continued. Use this time as you wish. Pray to your gods, hold your loved ones, make peace with your ending. When the time is past, we will advance. Your fleet will be destroyed, your colonies will be burned, your home world will be reduced to ash. This is not negotiation. This is not war. This is simply the end of your kind." He cut the transmission and turned back to his tactical display. 500 ships formed a perfect arc around the outer edge of the system, blocking every escape route. In the center, barely visible against the backdrop of stars, was a small blue dot, Earth home to 8 billion humans who had just learned that the universe was not the friendly place they had imagined. How many ships do they have? Vorath asked. 87 confirmed vessels, Admiral, Mostar, patrol frigates and older destroyers. Their newest ship is a dreadnought called the Prometheus. It was completed less than 3 years ago. Vorath nodded slowly. 87 ships. How many could they produce if we gave them time? Unknown, Admiral. Their industrial capacity is significant, given a decade. Perhaps, too, they could feel the force that might challenge a smaller Dominion fleet, which is why we do not give them a decade. Morath turned to his second in command, a scarred veteran named Desk. The Council was wise to act now. Another generation, and these humans might have become a genuine threat. Desk's mandibles clicked in agreement. They breed quickly, Admiral, and they innovate at a disturbing rate. The Council's intelligence reports suggest they went from primitive radio communications to interstellar travel in less than 300 years. Yes, Vor said. Dangerous species. The galaxy will be safer without them. He settled into his command chair and watched the humans scramble. It was going to be a long 48 hours, but Vorath was patient. He had waited centuries for worthy prey. He could wait 2 more days for the end of a species. On Earth the world was ending, not literally, not yet, but the knowledge of what was coming had spread faster than any government could contain it. The transmission from Admiral Vorath had been broadcast on every frequency, and within an hour every human being on the planet knew that they had been sentenced to death by an alien armada. The reactions were as varied as humanity itself. In some cities there were riots. People flooded into the streets, screaming and fighting and taking whatever they could carry. Stores were looted, cars were burned. The thin veneer of civilization cracked and crumbled as millions of people tried to process the fact that everything they had ever known was about to end. In other places there was prayer, churches and mosques and temples filled to overflowing as people sought comfort. Their faiths, some prayed for salvation, some prayed for miracles, some simply prayed for the strength to face what was coming with dignity. And in quiet homes around the world, families gathered together. Parents held their children, lovers embraced, old friends called each other across continents just to hear familiar voices one more time. There was crying, there was laughter, there was the strange peace that comes when the worst has already happened and there is nothing left to fear. At United Nations Fleet Command there was only grim determination. Admiral Chen Weyan stood at the center of the command center, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the enemy fleet in terrible detail. She was 60 years old with gray hair cropped short and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt. She had commanded the relief fleet during the Mars Rebellion. She had never imagined anything like this. Give me options, she said. Her staff exchanged glances. Finally, Commander Rodriguez stepped forward. He was young, barely 40, but he had a reputation for tactical brilliance that had earned him a place in the command center. Admiral, we've run every simulation we can think of. There's no scenario where we win a direct engagement, their ships are larger, more heavily armed and more numerous. If we meet them in open battle, we'll be destroyed in less than an hour. Then we don't meet them in open battle, Chun said. What about guerrilla tactics? Hit and run. We know this system better than they do. It might buy us time, Rodriguez admitted. Days, maybe a week, but it won't change the outcome. They have enough ships to hunt us down while simultaneously bombarding Earth. We can't be everywhere at once. Chum closed her eyes. She had known the answer before she asked the question. But she had to ask. She owed her crews that much. What about evacuation? Someone asked. To where? Another officer responded. They've got the system locked down. Nothing gets out. The colonies on Mars and Europa will be destroyed along with Earth. The admiral said as much. Silence fell over the command center. On the displays, the Cathvari fleet held its position like a noose waiting to be tightened. Chen watched those 500 ships and felt something she had rarely felt in her long career: despair. Then a young communications officer spoke up. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the outer system, from the Orc cloud. Chun frowned. The Orc cloud? We don't have anything stationed out there. The authentication code is valid, ma'am. But it's old, really old. The officer's voice trembled slightly. It hasn't been used in over 200 years. The command center went very quiet. What does the transmission say? Chun asked. The officer swallowed hard. It says fleet command. This is you is indomitable. Request situation report. We are coming. Chun felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard that name before in history classes and classified briefings, and whispered stories that older officers told after too much to drink. The Indomitable. The ship that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The ship that had been built during the darkest chapter of human history, when humanity had turned its genius for destruction inward and nearly wiped itself out. That's impossible, Rodriguez said. The Indomitable was decommissioned, scrapped. The whole Defiance class program was erased from the records. Apparently not all the records. Charmured. She stepped closer to the display, her mind racing. Send them everything. Full tactical breakdown of the enemy fleet. Our defensive positions. Everything. Admiral Rodriguez looked confused. Even if that ship is real, what difference can one old frigate make against 500 warships? Chun turned to face him. Captain Helena Vance had been enjoying her retirement. For 3 years she had lived in a small house on the coast of New Zealand, far from the noise and politics of the United Nations Navy. She grew tomatoes in her garden. She read old books. She watched the waves roll in and tried not to think about the battle she had fought and the friend she had lost. At 73 years old she had earned her peace. Then the shovel landed in her backyard. She watched it come down through her kitchen window, a sleek military transport that burned her rose bush with its landing thrusters. By the time she reached her front door, 3 officers in full dress uniform were already walking up her path. Captain Vance, the lead officer said. He was young, maybe 30, with the nervous energy of someone who had been given a job he didn't fully understand. I'm Lieutenant Park on Special Operations. You need to come with us. Vance looked at the shuttle, then at the officers, then at the sky. She had heard the news. Everyone had 500 alien warships were sitting at the edge of the system, and humanity had 2 days to make peace with its extinction. I'm retired, she said. Yes, ma'am, but you've been reactivated. Orders from Fleet Command. For what? What possible use could an old woman be? At a time like this, Park hesitated. He glanced at his colleagues, then back at Vance. Ma'am, have you ever heard of a ship called the Indomitable? Vance went very still. She had heard that name before, a long time ago, in a classified briefing that she had tried very hard to forget. The briefing had been about the collapse wars, the terrible civil conflict that had nearly destroyed humanity 2 centuries ago. It had been about the weapons humanity had built during that war, weapons so terrible that the survivors had agreed to bury them forever. The Indomitable doesn't exist, Vance said carefully. It was decommissioned. Scrapped. It exists, ma'am, and it's been activated. We need someone to command it. Park swallowed hard. Someone who understands what it is, what it can do. Fleet Command searched every personnel file in the system. Your name came up. Why me? Because you wrote your thesis at the Academy on collapse war tactics. Because you served under Admiral Morrison, who was the last known commander to have direct knowledge of the Defiance-class program. Because Park trailed off. Because what? The young lieutenant met her eyes. Because Fleet Command believes you're the kind of person who can do what needs to be done, even if it's terrible. Vance stood in her doorway for a long moment. Behind her was the quiet life she had built, the peace she had earned, the years she had left. Ahead of her was a war they couldn't win, against an enemy they couldn't beat, in a ship that humanity had buried because it was too awful to remember. She thought about the tomatoes in her garden. She thought about the waves rolling against the shore. She thought about 8 billion people who were going to die in 48 hours unless someone did something impossible. Give me 5 minutes to pack, she said. The shuttle ride to the Orc Cloud took 6 hours. Van spent most of it reading classified files that made her blood run cold. Collapse wars had been humanity's darkest hour. In the 2180s, Earth's great powers had finally run out of resources to fight over and had turned on each other with weapons that made nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. Entire continents had been rendered uninhabitable. Billions had died. For a while it looked like humanity might actually succeed in destroying itself. Then the Defiance-class frigates were built. They were not ships designed to win battles. They were ships designed to end wars. Each one was packed with weapons that violated every rule of civilized conflict. Radiation bombs that would poison entire regions for centuries. Biological agents that could wipe out specific genetic profiles. Pulse weapons that could fry every electronic system within 1,000 km. But the weapons were not the worst part. The worst part was the doctrine. The commanders who designed the Defiance class understood something that their enemies did not. Wars are not won by destroying the other side. Wars are won by making the other side decide that victory is not worth the price. The Defiance-class frigates were built to extract that price in blood and fire and horror. They were built to make their enemies wake up, screaming for the rest of their lives. The doctrine had worked. Within 2 years of the first Defiance-class ship being deployed, the collapse wars were over. Not because one side had won, but because all sides had looked at what they were becoming and decided that peace was better than continuing. The survivors had buried their weapons, burned their records, and sworn never to speak of what they had done, and now, 200 years later, one of those buried weapons was being dug up. Vance finished reading the files and stared out the shuttle window at the darkness. Somewhere out there, the Indomitable was waiting for her, a ship built by monsters crewed by ghosts carrying weapons that humanity had sworn never to use again. She wondered what that said about her that she had agreed to command it. The Indomitable was smaller than Vance had expected. Modern warships were massive things, long, bristling with weapons and sensors and shields. The Indomitable was barely 300 from bow stern, a compact wedge of dark metal that looked almost primitive compared to the sleek vessels of the current fleet. But as the shuttle approached, Vance began to understand why this ship had survived when so many others had been scrapped. There was something about her lines, something about the way she hung in the void that spoke of purpose. This was not a ship designed to look impressive. This was a ship designed to kill things and survive long enough to do it again. The shuttle docked at the main airlock, and Vance stepped aboard for the first time. The corridor beyond was dim lit by emergency lights that cast long shadows on the walls. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and old metal. Everything felt heavy, solid, built to last. Chief Petty Officer Morrison met her at the airlock. He was a weathered man with tired eyes and calloused hands, and he saluted with the precision of someone who had been doing it for decades. "Welcome aboard, Captain. I wish it were under better circumstances." "So do I, Chief. What's our status?" "Reactors are at 60% and climbing. Main systems are coming online. Weapons are..." He hesitated. "Weapons are ready, most of them." "Most?" Marston's face went carefully blank. "Some of the weapon systems are locked behind authorization codes we don't have. Fleet Command is trying to track them down, but the records are scattered. A lot of the original documentation was destroyed after the wars." Vance nodded slowly. She had expected something like this. The people who built this ship had not wanted it to be easily used. They had built-in safeguards, layers of protection to ensure that only the right people could unleash its full potential. She wondered what kind of person the original designers had considered right. "Show me the bridge," she said. The bridge of the Indomitable was nothing like the bright, open command centers of modern ships. It was a cramped space buried deep in the hull, surrounded by meters of armor on all sides. The consoles were old, their designs unfamiliar, their labels written in abbreviations that Vance didn't recognize. But when she stepped inside and stood at the captain's station, she felt something she hadn't expected. She felt at home. "This is where they commanded from," she murmured. "The original crew during the wars." Morrison nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The Indomitable saw action in 17 major engagements during the collapse. She was one of only 3 Defiance-class ships to survive the war intact. What happened to her crew? Most of them didn't survive the war. The ones who did, Morrison shrugged, they scattered, disappeared. The records say some of them couldn't live with what they had done. Others just wanted to forget. Vance ran her hand along the captain's console. The metal was cold beneath her fingers, smooth and hard. How many orders had been given from this spot? How many lives had been ended with a word spoken here? "And now we're bringing her back," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you think we should?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of a question he had been asking himself for years. I think the universe is about to try to wipe out our entire species. I think 87 ships can't stop 500. I think we're going to die unless we do something desperate. He met her eyes. I think the people who built the ship would understand. Vance nodded slowly. He was right. The Defiance class had been built for exactly this kind of moment, the moment when everything else had failed, when all the normal options had been exhausted, when the only choice left was between extinction and horror. All right, she said, let's get to work. Over the next 12 hours, the crew of the Indomitable assembled. They came from every corner of the fleet. Volunteers who had answered the call for what everyone knew was probably suicide mission. Some were veterans who remembered old wars. Others were specialists who had studied obsolete technology. A few were young officers who had simply looked at the odds and decided that dying while fighting was better than dying while hiding. Vance met each of them personally as they came aboard. She shook their hands, looked into their eyes, and tried to judge whether they understood what they were signing up for. Most of them didn't. They thought they were volunteering for a desperate last stand. Admiral Vorath was eating when the report came in. He had ordered his flagship chef to prepare a traditional Cathar meal, the kind served before great victories. The meat was rare, almost bloody, and the spices burned his tongue in a way he found pleasantly nostalgic. He was thinking about how he would phrase his victory report to the council when his second-in-command interrupted him. Admiral, we have detected a human vessel approaching from the outer system. Vorath did not look up from his meal. Approaching only one. Yes, Admiral, a small ship. Our analysts believe it to be a frigate of some kind, though the design does not match anything in our records. Interesting. Vorath speared another piece of meat with his eating blade. And they are approaching rather than fleeing. Yes, Admiral, they are making no attempt at evasion. Their course suggests they intend to engage our fleet. Now Vorath did look up. His black eyes narrowed slightly. One frigate intends to engage 500 warships. It appears so, Admiral. Vorath considered this for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound like dead leaves scraping across stone. The humans are even more foolish than I thought. One ship against our fleet is not defiance, it is theater. They are making a gesture for their people to remember. He returned to his meal. Send a squadron to eliminate them. Something small. There is no need to waste resources on theatrics. How many ships, Admiral? 12 should be sufficient. Destroyers, let the humans see that we consider them so little a threat that we send our smallest vessels to deal with them. The bowed and relayed the orders. Across the Cathvari formation, 12 destroyers broke from their positions and began accelerating toward the distant human ship. It was a routine operation, the kind that required no thought or concern. Vath expected it to be over within hours. He returned to his meal and thought no more about it. Captain Vance watched the enemy destroyers approach. They came in a standard attack formation, spread out to maximize their fields of fire, confident in their numerical advantage. Each one was at least 3 times the size of the Indomitable, bristling with weapons that could punch through modern armor like paper. But the Indomitable was not a modern ship, and Vance was not a modern Commander, range, she asked. 50,000 km. And closing. Chun reported they'll be in. Effective weapons range in approximately 12 minutes. Too far, Vance shook her head. We need them closer, closer. Captain, our weapons are 200 years old. They don't have the range of modern systems, but what they lack in reach they make up for in other ways. Vance studied the approaching formation. Reduce speed, let them close the distance. Chun hesitated, then relayed the order. The Indomitable slowed her ancient engines, throttling back, letting the Kithvari destroyers gain on her. To the enemy, it would look like the human ship was losing power, perhaps suffering some malfunction. They would grow confident, careless. That was the plan. The minutes ticked by. Vance sat in her chair, motionless, watching the red icons creep closer and closer around her. The bridge crew worked intense, silent. Some of them were sweating. Others were pale. None of them had ever been in combat against an alien species before. None of them had any idea what to expect. Neither did Vance, not really, but she had read the reports. From the collapse wars, she had studied the tactics that the Defiance class frigates had employed against enemies just as overwhelming, and she knew one thing for certain: the key to winning an impossible fight was not strength, it was surprise. 20,000 km, Chun reported. They're slowing down, taking attack positions. Good, they think we're helpless. Vance leaned forward. Wait for my signal, Captain. They're targeting us. Multiple weapons locks. Wait. They're charging weapons. I'm reading energy spikes across all 12 ships. Wait. The first shots were fired. Plasma bolts screamed across the void, bright streaks of energy that would vaporize anything they touched. They were warning shots, designed to test the human ship's defenses, to see how it would react. The Indomitable didn't react. She simply continued her slow drift, presenting an easy target. They're firing again, Chun said. Her voice was strained, direct. Hits incoming. Brace for impact. The plasma bolt struck the Indomitable's hull and the ship shuddered. Alarm screamed. Damage reports flooded in, but when the smoke cleared and the sensors recalibrated, the Indomitable was still there. Scorched, yes. Damaged, certainly, but intact. All integrity holding, Chun reported, her voice filled with disbelief. How is that possible? Because this ship wasn't built to modern standards. Vance smiled grimly. She was built to survive weapons far more terrible than plasma bolts. The people who designed her expected to fight in conditions that would kill any modern vessel. She's ugly and old and slow, but she can take a beating that would destroy anything in the current fleet. They're closing in 5,000 km. They're preparing for another volley. Now, Vance said, all weapons fire. The Indomitable came alive. Her weapons were not the elegant systems of modern warships. They were crude, brutal things designed to inflict maximum damage in minimum time. Rail guns hurled slugs of depleted uranium at velocities that the HFY sensors couldn't track. Missile tubes vomited dozens of warheads, each one packed with explosives that had been banned by every civilized society in the galaxy. Energy weapons that had no official names burned holes through armor that had never faced anything like them. The Gathari destroyers had been expecting a dying prey animal. They got a wounded predator instead. The lead destroyer took 6 railgun impacts in 2 seconds. The slugs punched through its forward armor and continued through the Ship exiting the other side in a shower of debris and frozen atmosphere. Ship's reactor went critical before the crew even understood what was happening. It exploded in a flash of light that momentarily blinded every sensor in the area. 2 more destroyers went down in the first 30 seconds. The Indomitables missiles found them, overwhelming their point defense with sheer numbers, detonating against their hulls in chains of fire that tore them apart from the inside. A 4th ship lost its engines to a lucky rail gunshot and began drifting helplessly, its crew screaming for help that wouldn't come in time. Then the HFY started fighting back. Plasma bolts hammered the Indomitable from every direction. Her shields, ancient systems that operated on principles modern engineers didn't fully understand, flickered and failed. Her hull buckled and tore as weapons designed to kill starships found there. Mark's compartments decompressed. Crew members died. The ship screamed in a voice of rending metal and failing systems, but she didn't stop. Target the nearest destroyer, Vance ordered. Her voice was calm, impossibly calm, as if she were discussing routine maintenance rather than commanding a dying ship in the middle of a battle. Close to point-blank range, Captain, if we get that close, do it. The Indomitable accelerated toward the nearest Cathar destroyer, ignoring the plasma bolts tearing at her flanks. Cathvari captain saw her coming and tried to evade, but the human ship was faster than she looked. They collided at a combined velocity that should have destroyed both vessels. It didn't destroy the Indomitable, a reinforced bow designed for exactly this kind of maneuver punched into the Cathvari destroyer's side like a knife into flesh. The impact killed a dozen human crew members instantly, crushed by the force of collision, but it also tore the destroyer in half, splitting the alien ship into 2 pieces that spun away into the void, venting atmosphere and bodies. The Indomitable pulled free, trailing debris and fire, and turned toward her next target. The battle lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, 11 Cathvari destroyers were dead. Some had been torn apart by weapons fire, others had been rammed, one had simply surrendered, its captain so horrified by what he was witnessing that he shut down his weapons and waited to be destroyed. The 12th destroyer fled. Its captain, a young officer named Theos, had watched his entire squadron die in less time than it took to eat a meal. He had seen the human ship take damage that should have killed it a dozen times over, only to keep fighting. He had watched it ram one of his colleagues' ships like a wild animal, sacrificing parts of itself just to take another enemy with it, and he had run. His crew didn't blame him. They were all traumatized, all convinced that they had just witnessed something impossible. The human ship should not have won. It should not even have survived the first volley, yet there it was, battered and bleeding, but still alive, still dangerous. The report to Admiral Vareth was incoherent with terror. He spoke of a ghost ship, vessel that refused to die, crewed by beings who seemed to have no fear of death. He described weapons that the Cathvari had never seen before, tactics that made no sense, a willingness to sacrifice everything just to take more enemies down. On the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, Admiral Voreth listened to the report with growing unease. 11 ships, he said quietly. They lost 1 frig's worth of combat effectiveness, and they destroyed 11 of our destroyers. Yes, admirals, Voice was carefully neutral. The human vessel is still active, heavily damaged, but still operational and still moving. Toward us, yes, Admiral. The Cathvari called them the 7 days of fire. For 1 full week, the Indomitable haunted the Sol system like a ghost. She appeared from nowhere, struck without warning, and vanished before the enemy could respond. She hid in asteroid fields and behind moons, and in the shadows of gas giants. She ambushed supply convoys and harassed patrol ships and attacked anything that strayed too far from the main fleet. And she killed. On the first day after the initial battle, she caught a squadron cruisers refueling near Jupiter. The attack came from the planet's radiation belts where no sane ship would travel. The Indomitable emerged from the electromagnetic chaos like a demon, rising from hell, her weapons blazing. 3 cruisers died before the others could escape. On the second day, she destroyed a communications relay that the Cathvari had established near Saturn. The relay was supposed to be secret, hidden in the rings where no one would find it. The Indomitable found it anyway. She tore it apart and left the wreckage floating among the ice and rock. On the third day, she attacked the fleet directly. It was insane, suicidal. A single damaged frigate against nearly 500 warships. Admiral Varth couldn't believe the sensor readings when they came in. He ordered his captains to hold position, certain that this was some kind of trick. It wasn't. The Indomitable came in fast and low, hugging the ecliptic plane where the fleet sensors had difficulty tracking. She launched every missile she had, swarm of warheads that filled the space around her like an angry cloud. Most of them were shot down by point defense, but some got through. 5 Cathari ships died in that attack. 5 more were damaged, and by the time the fleet reorganized and began pursuit, the Indomitable had vanished again, slipping into the asteroid belt like a serpent, disappearing into tall grass. Admiral Voreth began to understand what he was facing. The War Council met on the 4th day. Voreth had summoned his senior captains to the Dominion's wrath for a face-to-face meeting. The holographic communication systems weren't secure anymore, not since the humans had somehow hacked into 3 separate encrypted channels. They had to discuss their strategy in person like primitives. The captains gathered in the flagship's grand hole, a chamber designed to intimidate with its size and grandeur. Golden columns reached toward a ceiling painted with scenes of Cathvari conquest. Tapestries depicted the extinction of lesser species. Everything about the room was meant to remind viewers of the Dominion's power and glory. None of the captains felt powerful or glorious today. 47 ships. Captain Morith said he was old, even by Cathvari standards. His scales faded to a pale gray. In 7 days, 1 human frigate has destroyed 47 of our vessels. Not just destroyed, Captain Nasara added. She was younger, ambitious, but her voice carried none of its usual confidence. Humiliated, we sent squadrons to hunt her. She destroyed them. We set traps. She avoided them. We tried to predict her movements. She was always somewhere else. She fights like nothing I've ever seen, Marth continued. She takes damage that should kill her, and she keeps fighting. She attacks in ways that make no tactical sense, sacrificing herself just to take more of us down. It's not warfare, it's madness. Moreth listened to his captains argue and felt something cold settling in his chest, it was an unfamiliar sensation, one he hadn't experienced in centuries. It took him a moment to recognize it. "Fear, it is not madness," he said. Quietly, the captains fell silent. Moreth rose from his chair and walked to the center of the hall. His footsteps echoed on the polished stone floor. Human ship is not fighting randomly. She's following a doctrine, a strategy, designed specifically for situations like this where one force is vastly outnumbered by another. "What kind of strategy?" Desara asked. Vorith turned to face her. "The strategy of unacceptable cost. The humans understand that they cannot defeat us in direct battle, so they are not trying to defeat us. They are trying to make victory so expensive that we choose not to pursue it. That is foolish," Morris scoffed. "We have 500 ships. We could absorb these losses and still reduce their home world to ash." "Could we?" Laura walked to a display screen and activated it. A map of the Sol system appeared, showing the positions of all Cathari vessels. Red markers indicated ships that had been destroyed. Yellow markers showed damaged vessels. There were too many markers of both colors. 47 ships lost, another 31 damaged badly enough to require repair. Our supply lines are under constant threat. Our communications have been compromised. Our crews are exhausted from maintaining constant alert status." Moreth turned back to his captains. "And we still haven't reached Earth. Then let us advance." Moreth's voice was harsh with frustration. "Push forward with our full strength. The human fleet cannot stop us." "No, they cannot," Boreth agreed, "but that one ship can. She will hit our flanks. She will attack our rear. She will destroy our supply ships and cut our communications and pick off any vessel that falls behind. By the time we reach Earth, how many ships will we have left? 400, 300, it doesn't matter. Any number would be enough to destroy one plant." "Yes," Moreth's voice cut through Moreth's protest like a blade, "but we did not come here merely to destroy one planet. We came here to demonstrate the Dominion's power, to show the galaxy what happens to species that defy us." He gestured at the display. "What does the galaxy see now?" "They see one human ship, one obsolete frigate holding off the greatest fleet the Dominion has assembled in a century. They see Cathvari warships being destroyed by a species we were supposed to erase in 48 hours. The captains were silent. "If we destroy Earth at the cost of half our fleet, we do not demonstrate power." Varth continued. "We demonstrate weakness. We show every watching species that the Dominion can be hurt, that we can be made to bleed." He shook his head slowly. "The damage to our reputation would take generations to repair. Then what do you suggest?" the Zara asked. "We cannot retreat. The Council would never allow it." "No, we cannot retreat." Voreth returned to his chair. "But perhaps we can wait. The human ship is running on borrowed time. Her damage is extensive. Her crew is exhausted. Sooner or later she will make a mistake, or her systems will fail, or her luck will simply run out. And until then we hold position. We consolidate our forces. We hunt her with overwhelming numbers." Moreth's black eyes glittered. "And we learn. Every engagement gives us more data about her capabilities. Eventually we will find a weakness, and when we do, we will exploit it." The captains nodded slowly. It was not the glorious victory they had been promised, but it was a plan. Something to do besides watching their ships die one by one as they filed out of the Grand Hall, VH remained seated, staring at the tactical display. 47 ships, nearly 10% of his fleet lost to a single vessel. He thought about the human captain, whoever they were. What kind of being commanded a ship like that? What kind of mind conceived tactics so brutal, so desperate, so utterly without fear of death? For the first time in his long career, Admiral Vor found himself respecting his enemy. He wondered if that respect would be his undoing. Aboard the Indomitable, the crew was dying, not from enemy fire, though that it claimed its share. They were dying from exhaustion, from stress, from the accumulated weight of a week spent running and fighting and running again, never stopping, never resting, always knowing that the next moment might be their last. Captain Vance walked the corridors of her ship and saw the cost written on every face. The young nine who had volunteered for glory and now stared at nothing with hollow eyes. The veteran chief who had seen wars before, but nothing like this. The medics who had run out of places to put the wounded and now simply did their best to make the dying comfortable. The Indomitable herself was falling apart. Her hull was scarred with plasma burns and impact craters. 3 of her 4 main engines were running on emergency backups. Her weapon systems were operating at less than a third capacity. The ship that had been waking from a 200-year sleep just 10 days ago was now an old woman on her deathbed, but she was still fighting, and so was her crew. Captain Commander Chun approached Vance. In the corridor, the executive officer looked 10 years older than she had a week ago. Engineering reports that the primary fusion reactor is destabilizing. We have maybe 48 hours before it goes critical. Can they fix it? They can try. But we need to power down almost everything else. Weapons, shields, sensors. Chun shook her head. We'd be blind and helpless for at least 6 hours. Then we can't fix it. No, ma'am. Vance leaned against the corridor wall and closed her eyes. She was so tired. Every bone in her body ached. Her mind felt like it was wrapped in cotton, struggling to process information that should have been simple. 48 hours, that was all they had left. After that, the reactor would fail, and the Indomitable would be nothing more than a floating coffin. What's the status of the enemy fleet? She asked. They've pulled back to the outer system, consolidated their forces. They're not chasing us anymore. Chun paused. I think they're scared. Good. Vance opened her eyes. That means it's working, Captain. With respect, what exactly is working? We've destroyed 47 ships. The Grand Hall of the Dominion's wrath had never felt so quiet. Admiral Voreth sat at the head of the long table, watching his captains file in one by one. They moved like soldiers returning from a defeat, their shoulders slumped, their eyes tired. None of them met his gaze directly. Outside, the Sol system waited. Earth was still there, still blue and green and alive. Humanity's fleet was still intact. 87 ships that had watched the Indomitable's last stand from a distance, learning, adapting, preparing, and in the darkness between worlds, the broken hull of the human frigate drifted silently, a monument to what one ship could do against impossible odds. When all the captains were seated, Very spoke. We have a decision to make. The words hung in the air. No one responded. Our orders from the council were clear. We were sent to erase humanity from the galaxy, to demonstrate the Dominion's power and remind the watching species what happens To those who defy us, Morith's voice was flat, empty of emotion. We have failed. To do this, Admiral Captain Morith began. We have not yet destroyed Earth. Boreth continued, cutting him off. But we have already failed. The galaxy has been watching for 7 days. They have seen a single human ship crewed by a few hundred volunteers fight our fleet to a standstill. They have seen us lose 47 vessels to an enemy that should have been a footnote. He stood and walked to the viewport. The stars looked different. Now somehow less welcoming. Every species in the galaxy now knows that the HFY can be hurt, that we can be made to bleed, that a sufficiently determined enemy, even a small one, can make us pay dearly for our victories. He turned back to face his captains. This is not what the council wanted. This is the opposite of what they wanted. Then let us finish it, the Sarah said. Her voice was strained but defiant. We still have over 400 ships. The human fleet is nothing compared to us. We can advance on Earth, destroy their defenses, and complete our mission. The humans may have fought well, but in the end they will still die. Several captains nodded in agreement. Others remained silent. Yes, V said slowly, we could do that. The mathematics are clear. We have the ships, the firepower, the mandate from the council. We could reduce Earth to cinders and salt the ashes. We could kill every human in the system. He paused. But at what cost? The question echoed through the silent hall. I have been calculating, Vath continued. If we advance on Earth, the human fleet will engage us. They will fight desperately. As their frigate did, they will use every tactic their captain demonstrated, every dirty trick, every suicidal maneuver. They have been watching and learning for 7 days. We can still defeat them, Marth insisted. Yes, but how many ships will we lose? 100, 200. Voreth shook his head. And that assumes the humans have no more surprises, that they haven't hidden more ships like the Indomitable somewhere in their system, that they haven't developed more weapons from their dark past. You think they have more ships like that? The Sarah's voice wavered slightly. I don't know. Voreth's black eyes were unreadable. And that is the problem. We came here expecting to cleanse a primitive species. Instead, we found an enemy that fights like nothing we have ever encountered, an enemy that seems to have no fear of death, an enemy whose past is apparently so terrible that they buried their most effective weapons rather than remember them. He returned to his seat and clasped his hands on the table. What else have they buried? What other horrors are sleeping in their archives, waiting for a threat severe enough to justify their resurrection? The captains exchanged uneasy glances. I have lived for over 300 years, Farith said quietly. I have commanded fleets for more than a century. I have personally overseen the extinction of 12 species. In all that time, I have never encountered a species like humanity. What makes them so different? Vor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of understanding. He wished he didn't have. Most species we encounter have never faced extinction. They have never had to fight for survival against an enemy as intelligent and ruthless as themselves. When they face the Dominion, they fight well, but they fight as beings who have known peace. They are not prepared for true war. He gestured toward the viewport, toward the distant sun. Humans are different.